Hello and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, my name is Hannah. And welcome to the end of this crazy month. It's June 29th and I am wearing a sweater because it is freezing here and also very rainy. The entire month, we pretty much went from like, oh, we're in a heat wave to, okay, it's winter again and it's constantly raining in 60 degrees or less. So besides the weather being just whatever it's wanting to do lately, my reading month has also been very strange. I think it's because a lot of the books I've read have been between like 1.5 to 2 stars. So I haven't really had a book that's kind of captivated me recently, and I think that's just kind of made the feel of this month just be kind of a downer. And also, the beginning of this month, I got my Pfizer vaccine, and that kind of knocked me out for a week. And then recently, my sleep schedule's been completely messed up, or I haven't been able to sleep at night, and so I was sick from that as well last week. So me trying to plan out these videos and read and stuff has just been not what I wanted it to be. So I'm really thankful to leave this month behind, and I'm actually having to film this a day early because tomorrow I get my braces adjusted again, and I never really know how that's gonna go or how much pain I'm gonna feel, so I'd rather have this already done than try to film in a lot of pain. So anyway, all of that is out of the way. The first book I actually can't talk about because it's for another video, so I actually only have 3 books to talk about this time. However, the last one is a short story collection, and I'm gonna kind of talk about each story just a little bit, so I guess that'll probably make up for it. So the first book we have here is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a horror fantasy novel. It came out just last year in 2020, and unfortunately I ended up giving this only 2 stars. Hi. Whoa, 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 whoa. He came out of nowhere.
Hey.
Hi, look at you. Your hair is gone.
Yeah.
Oh my god, no more hair. So the summary for this book is actually quite long, and I couldn't really put it into my own words, so I'm just gonna read it from my tablet here. So Patricia Campbell has always planned for a big life, but after giving up her career as a nurse to marry an ambitious doctor and become a mother, Patricia's life has never felt smaller. The days are long, her kids are ungrateful, her husband is distant, and her to-do list is never really done. The one thing she has to look forward to is her book club, a group of Charleston mothers united only by their love for true crime and suspenseful fiction. In these meetings, they're more likely to discuss the FBI's recent siege of Waco as much as the ups and downs of marriage and motherhood. But then an artistic and sensitive stranger moves into the neighborhood. The book club's meetings turned into speculation about the newcomer. Patricia is initially attracted to him, but when some local children go missing, she starts to suspect the newcomer is involved. She begins her own investigation, assuming that he's a Jeffrey Dahmer or Ted Bundy. What she uncovers is far more terrifying, and soon she and her book club are the only people standing between the monster they've invited into their homes and their unsuspecting community. So if there was some shakiness going on there, Torty is trying to mess with the camera a bit. So the description of this book makes it seem a lot more interesting than it actually is. It really makes it seem like the focus is going to be on this group of women trying to team up against this vampire, and it's kind of the opposite and is more of a really like isolationist story. So I've seen this book pretty much everywhere. I have also previously read Grady Hendrix's My Best Friend's Exorcism, although I did listen to that on audiobook instead of actually read a physical copy. And I really liked that one, so I was really expecting that type of vibe going into this, especially since it takes place in the late 80s and early 90s. And no. So this actually started off pretty okay, and after like the first third, I thought, oh, I'm probably gonna rate this like a 3 or a 3.5. It's fine, it's not fantastic, but it is interesting. And then the gaslighting started. So instead of this really being like a group of women coming together, it's pretty much one person, the main character, Patricia, being like, I saw this, or this happened, or like, we have to protect the children, and everyone else just gaslighting the hell out of her, and pretty much being like, you're crazy, shut up, like, we're not gonna ruin our perfect lives for this, and etc., etc. And pretty much just siding with this brand new person who is barely really around. And especially the actions of like her husband, it just drove me crazy and made me hate everyone in this book. And a bit of a spoiler alert here, this is minor spoiler, the gaslighting is so bad in this book that it actually drives Patricia to OD on pills, and it's just like, holy shit, like what the fuck is happening? Also, another minor spoiler, but also content warning, there's also a rape in this book that comes out of nowhere. It's very sudden, it's very just, why is this here? And that's when the book just kind of completely lost me. Like, everyone is just trash pretty much, and everyone is more of trying to like keep this image of like a perfect person, even though like all of the husbands are cheaters, all of the husbands are liars. There's absolutely no good relationship depicted in this book. They are all very, very toxic, and there's even one couple where the husband hits his wife, and oh my god, Ori just picked up his empty box of litter and is carrying it around the kitchen. But even with all of this, the wives' main purpose is to just make their husbands happy. And it's really depressing. And even though it takes place in the 90s, it felt like it was more taking place in the 40s or 50s. Because like the main character, Patricia, she gave up her career just to get married. And it's just like, why? Why is that necessary? And all the other wives, it's the same thing. Like, none of them have jobs. They're all just like, yeah, I wanted to get married, so I left everything for this. And it just felt so weird how much control the husbands had over their wives and how much influence and everything. And it pretty much just made me hate the characters, not really like the book, and just feel so sorry for Patricia. I just felt sympathetic toward her, and the whole plot around the vampire just kind of became secondary because of how people were treating her. The best parts of the book were a character named Miss Mary, who's only there for bits and pieces, and also just how brutal some of the scenes can be. I really like when vampires are depicted as like these bloody, vicious creatures instead of being like these perfect beings, and that is really shown here. So I was surprised by that and interested in that. However, it really couldn't save the rest of the book for me, and how shitty the characters were, it was just a bit too much. Next, we actually have a book where I received the e-arc from NetGalley. So this book will be released July 17th of this year, and that is Where the Briars Sleep by Emma Bevan. This is a gothic horror novel. Ori just completely jumped on me. And unfortunately, again, I ended up rating this 1.5 stars. So after discovering her stepsister dead in her wardrobe, Rose experiences visions, nightmares, and loss of consciousness that gets her labeled as a hysteric and sent away. When she returns home, things seem to be back to normal, but slowly her mind seems to unravel once again as the visions and nightmares return stronger than ever. After meeting the neighbor's son, Henry, Rose is stricken by love. Can Henry save Rose from the horrors of her childhood home, or is she destined to be cursed by what she witnessed? So this really seemed like it was going to be this vengeful ghost story, and I was really into that. And I also love the atmosphere that gothic horrors generally bring. However, this book was just confusing. That's like the best way to summarize it overall, is just confused. So to start, this novel isn't set up like most generally are. It's a little over 400 pages, so it was thicker than I was expecting, but there are 80 chapters. So most chapters are 2 to 3 pages, but there are some that are only half a page long. And so I'm glad it was like that, because it really helped me get through it and be like, okay, I just got through another chapter, But even right away in the beginning, I had a really hard time telling which sister's head I was in, There's Rose, Maggie, and then a stepsister, Sarah, who had passed away. And Rose and Maggie essentially seem like the same character, especially in the first 10 chapters or so. We would be in one sister's head, and then the next paragraph it would switch to the other sister, and I wouldn't realize that until 2 paragraphs later, and I would be really confused on what was going on. So in the beginning I was kind of oh no, I'm gonna have a really rough time of this. But eventually I did get used to that kind of writing style, and it wasn't an issue anymore. But it really couldn't save the rest of the book. Obviously, since it's gothic horror, it is slow paced, as they generally are. And usually I am fine with that, but in this case, things became extremely repetitive, and it wasn't even interesting things, it was mundane details like getting dressed, going to dinner, sitting in the parlor, and those events just happened over and over and over again, and so we got those descriptions over and over and over again, and they were so mundane that I just ended up getting really bored, and it was a bit frustrating with nothing really happening. There were also some points where the writing was very contradictory. It would rain a lot in this story and cool the weather off, and so at one point they're talking about how much cooler the weather is and how nice it feels, and then the next sentence they were talking about how stifling it was in this heat, and it's you literally just said it was cold, but now you're saying you're too hot. And so there were some instances like that where I was did I misunderstand what was going on, what was being talked about? And so that just kind of compounded on the confusion. So right away from the beginning, you pretty much understand that Rose has a secret and knows a lot of what's happening, but she's keeping it a secret from everyone, including the reader. And so we only get hints here and there of what happened in the past. And unfortunately, it's too little too late kind of thing. It's just not enough for us to ever fully comprehend what's going on. And you can kind of make guesses, but it's never straight out said. And so that mixed with how it ends, I'm just confused, and there's no real payoff for me because I don't get the answers I was seeking. I just have more questions and am more generally confused about what happened and what's currently happening. I don't really understand any of it. And I generally like stories where they end where you're just questioning everything that previously happened. I'm fine with that. I rather enjoy that. But in this instance, I understood so little that it was hard to get enjoyment out of that, and so that is why this ended up being disappointing. Also, one thing that I noticed is it's reiterated a lot how close Rose and Maggie were, and they live on this huge estate, and they even share a room and a bed, which I thought was really strange. And even with all of this, they never really talk about what's happening to each other. They just keep everything to themselves. And it's just why would you watch each other suffer? So in the end, the tension wasn't there for me, the scares weren't there for me. I really wish the details had been put into those aspects instead of the mundane. And sadly, this just didn't live up to my expectations. Lastly, we have a book that I just finished this morning and is the second one in this little stack behind me. And that is Vampires Never Get Old, Tales with Fresh Bite by Zoraida Cordova and Natalie C. Parker. This is actually 11 short stories by a lot of different authors, but these two are the main ones who actually prompted the creation of this and gave the prompts to the writers. So this is a pretty recent one, it just came out last year, and essentially each author has this little writing prompt that has to do with some myth from vampire lore, and then they create this short story about it. So I'm gonna go through the title of each story, who wrote it, a little summary of it, how I felt about it, and the rating. And in the end, I averaged all the scores together, and overall this is a 3.3, 3.4 rating, which I would probably just say in general it's 3. It's an average book, and it has a definite mix of stories in it. So the first one is 7 Nights for Dying by Tessa Gratton. It's about this teenage girl who is turned into a vampire over the course of 7 nights. She can stop anytime she wishes before that 7th night. So if she goes through night 6 and decides, I don't want to do this anymore, she can do so. And so the whole story is just kind of her going through her thought process on does she really want to do this? Is it worth it? Does she want to stay 17 forever kind of deal? And I rather liked this one, the insightfulness of it and kind of showing the temptation of living forever and kind of that world of being a vampire and being able to like spend 100 years honing your art was really interesting, and so I gave this one 4 stars. The second story is The Boys from Blood River by Rebecca Roanhorse, which if that's her actual last name, that's pretty badass. I love that. So this one's about a gay teenage boy who is severely bullied by the jocks at his school. He works at the local diner and he pretty much sees his savior as being this legend of the Blood River Boys, who you essentially summon if you dare to play their song. This was another one I really liked and thought it was pretty unique because it wasn't like the vampires hunting the person, it was the individual summoning the vampires like with their will. And it also has to do with being given a choice. And I also gave this one 4 stars, so the start of this book is pretty good. Next is Senior Year Sucks by Julie Murphy. This one I only ended up giving 2 stars as it's about this cheerleader captain and she's actually a vampire slayer, and they're on their way home from an away game on a bus, and along the way they see a bus with a flat and it's just like fellow students and fans and stuff like that. So they take them on their bus and the slayer senses that there's a vampire in their midst, and it turns out this vampire is a fellow student who is pretty new to the school, and insta love ensues, and it's just overall boring. So I didn't really enjoy this one, unfortunately. It just wasn't for me, hence the 2 stars. Fourth is The Boy and the Bell by Heidi Heelig. This one takes place around a trans student who is pretty much a grave robber. He goes around digging up bodies to take to the university to study for anatomy. One evening, however, he hears the bell of a freshly dug grave, which indicates that the person inside has been buried alive. So this one I also ended up giving 4 stars to. It's another story that is just interesting. I love the concept of it, and I feel like pretty much if you're into horror genre at all, you've heard of the concept of people being buried with like this tube and a string to where if they happen to wake up after being buried alive, they can ring the bell and have someone dig them out. And so I just really enjoyed seeing this concept in this story. Next is a guidebook for the newly sired Desi vampire by Samira Ahmed. So this one I actually DNF'd, and for the averaging of the ratings, I just considered it a 1 since I did not like it. It's essentially about an app with a really ridiculous name that I can't even remember that is apparently preloaded on everyone's phone but pops up if you get turned into a vampire. And it pretty much like gives you a breakdown on why you're here, what you need to do now, how to survive and everything, but it's written in the way of like an old person trying to sound hip and cool kind of thing. And I ended up just kind of skimming through it and I thought it was boring. Next is In Kind by Kayla Whaley. This one is interesting and probably a little controversial. It's about a father who attempts to kill his 17-year-old disabled daughter through a morphine overdose. She is confined to a wheelchair and like she can't eat or anything, so she has a feeding tube. And I didn't exactly understand the extent of her disability, but it seemed like she was almost in a vegetative state, because the way they described it is that he had to take care of all of her needs and everything while he was also a high school teacher on top of it, so it was very overwhelming for him, and he called it a mercy killing. He didn't want her to have to suffer anymore. However, he thinks she's dead, but she's actually not, and so a local vampire turns her to save her, and shenanigans ensue. So I gave this one a 3 stars because it kind of had the connotation of we shouldn't allow people to die if they're suffering, and I kind of didn't like that. I feel like if someone is suffering greatly, they should be allowed to be put out of their misery, so to speak. Like, I am pro-humane euthanasia, that some countries do for like terminally ill patients. So, and it kind of seemed anti that at times. So that's kind of why I had it at a 3, because it was just kind of like, oh, this is a bit of a touchy subject. Next is Vampires Never Say Die by Zoraida Cordova and Natalie C. Parker. This one's about Brittany and Theo, who are best friends on Instagram. They've never met face to face though, and Theo decides that she's gonna throw a surprise party for Brittany to finally be able to meet her. Well, Theo organizes this party and invites all of Brittany's friends, but it turns out they're all vampires. So there might be more at stake than just their friendship here. I also give this one 3 stars. It was just okay. It was a little bit dumb at the end, but I did like the first half, like the first part of it. There was nothing really wrong with it, but there was nothing really amazing either. Next is Bestiary by Laura Ruby. This one is about recently turned Jude, who can actually talk to animals. She freely goes into the predator enclosures of a local zoo with no worries, ends up being hired there, and essentially just takes care of these creatures. A water shortage threatens the zoo, the people, the town, and Jude kind of suffers with them, as she is not drinking from people either. So I gave this one 4.5 stars. I really, really liked it. The interaction with her and the animals and the zookeeper, or the zoo owner, is just really cool. And just the descriptions of everything I really enjoyed, so I'm probably going to check out what other works this author has done, as this is one of my favorite stories in this book. Next is Mirrors, Windows, and Selfies by Mark Oshiro. So this one is in the format of blog posts and is about this 17-year-old boy named Cisco. Him and his parents, who are also vampires, live in complete isolation from everyone else in the world. They do this because apparently in this world vampires are not supposed to have children, so to protect him, they completely moved away from their clan and everyone they knew. However, telling his story online has consequences, as he is soon approached by other vampires like him, and he discovers that he is not alone. I give this one 4 stars. It was a pretty interesting read. It would have like the blog posts, and then there might be a few comments from like users underneath them and stuff, and so it really added to the story, and I thought made it more interesting. But I also liked the concept of like vampires being able to actually have a baby and it being like this huge taboo thing and no one really like understanding why it's possible and stuff. Next is probably my favorite story out of this collection, and also I would love to see this turned into an actual novel. It's The House of Black Sapphires by Danielle Clayton. So this is about a vampire family of 8. There are 6 daughters and then a mother and a father. They essentially move from place to place when the locals get a little too suspicious of them, and now they're returning to their roots in New Orleans in Louisiana. It's where their mom is from, but the girls themselves have never been there, and they find out that there is this huge underworld of these 5 wards that house all these different immortals. With how extravagant and beautiful everything is, the daughters wonder why their mother ever left and exactly what secrets she is hiding. I gave this 4.5 stars, and the setting is gorgeous. I want to see it on the screen. I want to know more about it. The world seems so interesting. Like, tell me more about these shadow barons that are in here. I would love to see this be an actual book, so I'm probably going to look more into this author as well. Lastly, we have First Kill by V.E. Schwab. So this one is another little romance between a teenage vampire slayer and a teenage vampire. They go to the same high school, and the slayer slowly realizes that there is a vampire. At a party, they are both dared to go into a closet alone together for 60 seconds, and that is where the real hunt begins. So I just gave this one 3 stars. It was better than the other slayer vampire story, but it's still just kind of strange and sudden and stuff, but it was okay. So that felt a lot longer than it should, but hopefully it edits down okay. But that is all for this month. I am so glad I completed that book this morning. I was a little bit nervous that I wouldn't complete it in time. But as always, thank you for hanging out with me. It is appreciated always. And until next time, bonne journée and au revoir.